Hello, what is going on, guys? Hockey Guy 1 here. Welcome to my review of Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog is directed by Jeff Fowler and stars Ben Schwartz, Jim Carrey, James Marsden, and Tika Sumpter. The story is basically about Sonic, who was basically banished to Earth, and it is kind of like living in peace behind everyone, and just kind of living his own thing without anyone really knowing about him until he accidentally sets off all the power in like the Pacific Northwest, and then pretty much they have to hire this guy named Dr. Robotnik to try and figure out what's going on. And basically, while Sonic has to try and get these rings that he accidentally sent to San Francisco back, and they go to San Francisco to like get him back along with time. And while Dr. Robotnik is basically trying to hunt down Sonic. The story, while not perfect, I do like some aspects of it, like some of the scenes like, where they're trying to go to San Francisco, and I kind of like that whole idea of it. I do also kind of like the idea is Sonic kind of like being alone, not really being noticed that much, and I do kind of like those ideas, but I mean, the story is not perfect, but I'll get into it later. Structure, I'm also kind of mixed on. I mean, I did kind of like some of the ideas of the first act. I mean, they did do a pretty good job kind of like telling the origin story of how Sonic got to Earth. I do feel like it was executed pretty well. I mean, it kind of like shows him going to Earth in the United States and like basically just being himself at Earth for most of it. And I did really like some elements of the second act. I mean, there's things that made sense. I mean, just some of the scenes where going to San Francisco on the road. I was okay with some of those, but it's not perfect, like I said, and I'll also get into that later in the negatives. Pacing is pretty decent. I mean, it's pretty fine in like the first act and a bit of the second act, but I mean, it's definitely not perfect. I mean, the signs make me off, but I like kind of get to it into that later. But it's the things I kind of like about it. I mean, the first and second acts did kind of feel a bit consistent to each other at times, but overall, I mean, it's not perfect, and I'll get back to it. So, I did really like Sonic's character. I mean, I feel like he was pretty fleshed out for the most part. I mean, they did a good job kind of like showing his origin story, like showing how he got to Earth, and they do a pretty good job like kind of showing how he kind of changes with like Tom, and how he kind of like wants more friends and just wants to do more life. To the point where like he just wants to stay on Earth because he realizes that he needs someone to be with, and I feel like that's really good character development for him, and it's like that. They do a very good job kind of like bringing him up throughout the movie. Like first in the movie, he's like doesn't really want to be with other people. He just would rather like be alone without people really noticing him. And over time in the movie, like his friendship with Tom just is what really helps out his character. I mean, it does really make him show him that you care and other people, and it just makes him realize that he needs to be with other people. It's kind of like what I like about Tom. I mean, I feel like he's a really good character, and as he is just like this police officer in Green Hill, and it feels like that they did a pretty decent job with him, his character. I mean, he's just, just wants to help Sonic, and is like one of the only friends of Sonic, and I do think that he did a really good job with developing him and Sonic's relationship, and just really shows throughout the movie. So the acting, I'd say, is pretty good. I mean, I do think that Ben Schwartz did a really good job as Sonic, as his delivery just feels like is a bit on point, as he does seem really confident when he says his lines, and it just seems like he really wants to be there, and it just kind of like feel like the character whenever he delivers his lines, as he does kind of like match it on it. And then as well as Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik, I think he did a very great job in it, as he did seem like he's having a lot of fun in the role, and that he did really care for it. And then there's also James Marsden, who played Tom, who I feel like he did a very good job in his role as Tom, as he did really feel like the character, and his delivery was on point in most scenes. The action is actually pretty fun. I mean, they do have a very well choreographed scene, like the climax, which is pretty much where Sonic and Dr. Robotnik are kind of like going through a bunch of different places around the world, like through his rings, and eventually, and they end up, and I do feel like that whole scene in the climax is just a really fun scene, and definitely made sense for it to be like at the top of this whole movie, as it's pretty much just the whole breaking point, because Dr. Robotnik's kind of like been going after him all movie, and he's got to San Francisco, and so they kind of make sense in the fight each other there, and I do feel like it was pretty well choreographed for the most part, and I felt pretty creative that they kind of made it so they kind of were going around the world, and so Sonic they finally defeated him, and it really feels like creative action, as well as some of those action scenes like where they're on the road, and it felt pretty sad, and it does seem like that they definitely changed a lot about these, and they did a very good job with the choreography. Said visual effects are great. I mean, the redesign of it, this Sonic just really helps it a lot. I mean, obviously in the original trailer it wasn't good, but like I do feel like just the redesign really helped it. I mean, it made him look a lot more like Sonic, and actually looked pretty realistic with its movements, and it does look pretty good for the most part. And looking at like Sonic when he does super speed, it does look pretty realistic at times, and it does actually look pretty convincing in most scenes. And I'd say that most of the time the visual effects are really good in this movie. And the cinematography is great. I mean, in some scenes, like the action scenes, I do feel like they do a good job kind of like using the right angles to kind of like capture the whole scene, and it just feels like most of the time choices for camera angles made sense for what the scene was doing, and did make sense for this whole movie. As you can kind of see in like the action scenes, most of the time they kind of use this kind of wide shot, kind of showing the whole thing, and I just like to do a pretty good job with that. And in most scenes, I'd say they did use some right angle that made sense. Like it did kind of like do a lot of close-ups and like talking scenes, obviously, and then as well, it's just the whole kind of like wideouts in the action scenes, like I kind of mentioned, did make a lot of sense, as they did do a very good job with it. That said, this movie does have its negatives. Like, for example, in this, like I said earlier, I did have my issues with the story. It's just that I feel like they added a bit too much into it. I mean, they kind of like try to focus on two things at once, but it doesn't exactly do that. I mean, it's just that it kind of makes the story feel a bit messy at times when they are doing that. And like two different things at once, like the whole Dr. Robotnik kind of like going after him thing. I just feel like that whole part of the story kind of made it a bit messy, and it didn't make sense. But like this, like that doesn't really make so much sense. And there are even some scenes that I feel like were a bit out of place, like that one scene, like when they're in the bar, just kind of feels like that was more out of place, if I'm being honest, and doesn't really make that much sense for the story of the film. Structure was not perfect. I mean, like I said, I did earlier, I mean, some things in the second act just didn't really make that much sense. I mean, like I said earlier, like that bar scene just kind of felt out of place, was kind of just random, and to be honest, and it feels kind of like a lot of, it's just that they kind of put too much on top of each other, like with the Dr. Robotnik stuff. I mean, I feel like this kind of having him, I mean, it makes sense, but it's just that it's a bit too much to me, and as well as there's just scenes like with Manny, I mean, it just, she just felt like those scenes kind of felt random and out of place. I mean, it weren't really the thing, like they really served that much to the plot, and it just kind of seemed random that Tom just brought Sonic to her, and it just felt out of place for the story, and was more so just random to me. Then the pacing as well gets affected by this, and it's not perfect. I mean, there are some things that don't make sense, like I said earlier, like the bar scene, and yeah, it's really the same kind of things that kind of affects the structure, kind of affects the pacing here, as that it kind of makes the film drag a bit and feel a bit longer than it should be. Maddie just, well, like I said earlier, I mean, her character just really isn't anything, if I'm being honest. I mean, she doesn't really show up until before the climax, and she has very little to do with the plot. I mean, she just doesn't really have much of a role, and feels like she's just a random character thrown in there, and it's just that I feel like they just didn't do enough with her character. I mean, she's barely in it, and they just don't really develop her enough. I mean, obviously, she's just barely in there, and she has very little personality, and it just doesn't really feel like she really does much to affect the story, as she's just randomly thrown in there right before the climax of the film. And I also feel like Dr. Robotnik is also a pretty bad villain. I mean, they don't really give him much of a reason to be a villain. I mean, it's just that he's kind of just a doctor who has to investigate the whole thing, and they don't really give him much of a motivation to want to feel evil. It just kind of shows that him kind of like he's not like the other humans at all, and doesn't really have much friends, and that's the biggest thing that they showed about his character. And it's just that, honestly, I don't feel like they really showed him enough to be that intimidating of a villain. I mean, he's in, I mean, it's not necessarily that, but it's just that I don't feel like they did enough to make him intimidating. I mean, it's just that he doesn't have that much of a motivation other than he wants to complete his task, and it doesn't really have any reason to want to act evil. And it's just that I feel like it's just a really poorly written villain. The humor is honestly really bad. I mean, I don't really laugh at it at all. I mean, a lot of it just seems like it was intended for like a younger audience, and it just doesn't really work for me. And as well as there's this one scene as well that I wasn't really, because like there's this joke where Sonic's like the best you can do, and then Dr. Robotnik replied with no, but thank you for asking. Like, I really felt like that's kind of a cheap joke. I mean, it just doesn't really hit me, and I don't really find it to be that funny. Soundtrack does kind of feel out of place. I mean, it doesn't really work for the movie most of the time, and it just kind of feels like most of these song choices were pretty random, and it just feels like it just didn't really work for most scenes, and it just kind of felt like they were a bit out of place. Then the editing did feel a bit choppy in some scenes. I mean, it doesn't really feel smooth when it comes from one shot to another at times, and it just feels a bit choppy in many different scenes, and more so it just doesn't really change character. Then it's more just a bit choppy. And so overall, Sonic the Hedgehog is a mediocre film, but it could have been much worse. So I'm going to give Sonic the Hedgehog a 5.5 out of 10. So that was my review of Sonic the Hedgehog. What are your thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.